Greetings and salutations, my fellow sovereigns. This is the Vocational Science Freedom Saturday Night Civics and 70 class. And tonight we're going to be going over an article from Zerohedge. And I came across this article on Gab. It was sent to me by someone who I regularly post with on Gab because it has a lot of the information that we actually teach here at the VSOF. And it was sent to me by someone saying, hey, what do you think about this? Can you take a look at it? And I said, sure, no problem. So as I started to skim through it, I realized that whoever this is, this gentleman, Joshua Stylman, who's on Substack, where Zerohedge got this article from, I realized he's just a fairly good researcher and it's fairly lengthy. So I don't think we're going to get through it all in one night, because what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to cross-reference the information that's in this article. I'm going to have the timeline document up as well, so we can cross-reference the timeline doc with anything else that we might want to make sure that we go over as he attempts to take a look at this corporate veil of America's hidden transformation. So the name of the article is, What If the America You Pledge Allegiance To Isn't the One Running the Show? And this is an article on Friday, March 14th, 2025. The Corporate Veil, America's Hidden Transformation. Executive Summary. What if the America you pledge allegiance to isn't the one running the show? This investigation examines how America's governance system fundamentally transformed since 1871 through a documented pattern of legal, financial, and administrative changes. The evidence reveals a gradual shift from constitutional principles toward corporate-style management structures, basically, i.e., corporate government. Not through a single event, but through an accumulation of incremental changes spanning generations that have quietly reconstructed the relationship between citizens and government. This analysis prioritizes primary sources, identifies patterns across multiple domains rather than isolated events, and examines timeline correlations, particularly noting how crisis often precedes centralization initiatives. Yes, also called false flags. By examining primary sources, including congressional records, Treasury documents, Supreme Court decisions, and international agreements, we identify how, 1, legal language and frameworks evolved from natural rights towards commercial principles. Another way to say this is the destruction of the common law for favor of equity, which is statutes, acts, ordinances, and codes, and also is Roman civil law as well. So a move away from common law and towards Roman civil law and equity, wherein you have contracts with the corporate state that they then perpetuate through statute, meaning charge you with things that are basically just commercial crimes and that have no damage party, like running a stop sign. And then number 2, financial sovereignty transferred incrementally from elected representatives to banking interests. Yes, that has been the fight all along about who controls the money. And I don't just mean controlling it from a standpoint of taxation. I mean literally who prints it or determines the value thereof is a better way to put that. And then 3, administrative systems increasingly mediated the relationship between citizens and government. Yeah, administrative systems, that's another way of putting it, to say the corporate state itself, private for-profit courts, which have their own Dun & Bradstreet numbers, which have separate purses from the states themselves, which makes them not immune to suit and does not give them 11th Amendment protection. And also, obviously, the monstrosity of what happened in 1933 with the ridiculous expansion of the federal corporate state. But that will be gotten to in a minute. To continue, this evidence prompts a fundamental re-examination of modern sovereignty, citizenship, and consent in ways that transcend traditional political divisions. For the average American, these historical transformations have concrete implications. The administrative systems created between 1871 to 1933 structured daily life through financial obligations, identification requirements, and regulatory compliance that operate largely independent of electoral changes. Right, because it doesn't matter if you're red team, blue team. It doesn't matter who goes in there. because it's an entirely different structure than the republic of which this country was founded. Understanding this history illuminates why citizens often feel disconnected from governance despite formal democratic processes. Well, what is a democracy? It's just that 51% can tell the other 49% what to do. Or, as other wise people in history found out, democracy is the time when 51% of the population realizes that they can pay themselves out of the treasury. The treasury is quickly eliminated, as we've seen the evidence thereof from Doge doing what it's been doing recently and finding all of this ridiculousness through USAID and things like the American Bar Association getting millions and millions and millions of dollars every single year to continue to administer us without our consent, mind you. But to continue, the system's managing key aspects of modern life, monetary policy, administrative regulation, citizen identification, which will be a major part of this whole breakdown tonight, were designed to operate with substantial independence from direct citizen control. True, for the exception of the fact that you're the idiot that puts your pen down on a piece of paper and signs it. That's called a contract. That is within your control. Just because somebody threatens you that you have to enter into a contract does not make that contract either A, lawful, or B, required. Just remember that. While mainstream interpretations of these developments emphasize practical governance, needs, and economic stability, the documented pattern suggests the possibility of more fundamental changes in America's constitutional structure, deserving closer scrutiny. I stumbled across a particular reference to the 1871 Act while browsing on Twitter. The post suggested that the United States has undergone a secret legal transformation in 1871, converting it from a constitutional republic into a corporate entity. True, where citizens were treated more like assets than sovereigns. Also true. Now, one thing about this, it didn't convert the constitutional republic. Okay, the constitutional republic was bankrupted in the Civil War. Then what they did was they created their monster, and they then said, well, we're going to give all of these services to this little corporation that we create over here in the District of Columbia. As far as the conversion, so it wasn't converted. The constitutional republic was simply bankrupted. Technically, as it is structured, it is still there. Unless and until every single last American, meaning we the people, either lets go of or dies, meaning lets go our claim to said form of government, or dies, the republic still exists because it comes from us. It comes from we the people. So I don't agree that it necessarily converted anything from the constitutional republic into a corporate entity. The corporate entity came into existence because the constitutional republic was bankrupted, and the 19 enumerated services, which the federal government was supposed to take care of for the states, then went into the receivership, if you will, of the corporation. And that corporation in 1871 that was created by the District of Columbia Act also got the receivership part of the debt. So they continued to service the debt of the bankrupt republic. And we'll get into the rest of that later if he doesn't. So, and by the way, I did, just on a personal note, just so you guys know, I did not read the totality of this article. So I am going to be going through this at the same time that you are tonight. And if we only get through half of it, that's fine. I'll continue to do another class to finish it off next Saturday if we need to, because I am going to stop and go through every single part of this. Because for the Luddites out there who have absolutely zero knowledge of any of this history, I found that in just skimming through this article, he did a fairly good job of presenting people the very bare bones minimum kind of introductory level of what some of these occurrences, facts, situations were and are. But I want to break this all down to get much deeper into every single itty bitty little part of this, so that when we're done with this, anybody can simply send the link to this complete article as we break it down, and everybody will have a very clear history of what the hell is actually going on around here. Okay, to continue. My first instinct was to dismiss it as yet another internet conspiracy theory. A quick Google search led to a PolitiFact fact-checking, dismissing the entire concept. Yes, of course, I'm sure they would. As pants on fire false. What's striking isn't just the brevity with which they dismiss a complex historical question, but their methodology. Right, this is the communists, this is the Luciferian Khazarian mob telling you, don't look here, don't look at that. That's not worth looking at. Okay, that's how the Luciferians keep everybody in control. Their main weapon, if you will, of the control over everybody through the systems of which they administer everyone is dissuasion. Oh, you're stupid if you think that's so ignorant. Oh, you think that's important, right? That is the single most used, I would say overused, tool of the Luciferian dark occultists is dissuasion. Dissuasion. Don't bother looking at that. Okay. So to continue, they interviewed exactly one legal expert, right, which of course was an attorney, cited no primary documents from the congressional record, examined none of the subsequent Supreme Court cases that reference federal corporate capacity, and ignored the documented financial transformation that followed. I've noticed that when establishment fact checkers reject claims with such dismissive certainty, while conducting minimal investigation, it often signals something worth examining more carefully. I would agree. This pattern prompted me to check the actual congressional record myself. That first document pulled a thread that unraveled into this investigation. Like finding an unexpected door in a familiar house, I couldn't help but wonder what else I'd been walking past without noticing. True. I would say most people that start down this rabbit hole certainly have that experience. Now, are they going to all open the same doors? No. Some people will take this right into one direction or right into one concept or be told by someone else that, oh, everything is based upon X. Right? You have these people out here. Oh, everything's based upon trust law or everything's trust law. Like, huh? What are you talking about? No. Or everything's just based on changing your citizenship. No, it's not. Is it important? Yes, one part of the piece. But this is a massive puzzle with probably 1,000 pieces in it. Every single piece of this puzzle is important. Every single piece of this puzzle shows the entire picture. And if you don't have, I would say at least 85% to 90% of this puzzle figured out, organized, and put together, you are going to not fully understand what is going on. And that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years of my life, is putting all of this information together and amassing hard drives of my mentors and others to continue to expand on the information, gather more facts, make better timelines, make better classes. So be careful about the doors you open, and just know that when you do open a door, it's not going to be the last one. And try to remember that. Okay. Okay. This analysis unfolds through several interconnected sections. First, we'll examine the historical context of the 1871 Act that recognized Washington, D.C. using corporate terminology, and explore the emergence of three influential power centers: London, Vatican City, and Washington, D.C. These are the three corporate city-states that run the world, with documented financial and diplomatic connections. Next, we'll trace the transformation of governance structures from 1813 to 1933, focusing on Wilson's administrative state, exactly, and the Federal Reserve's establishment, which, of course, he was blackmailed into signing into existence. Doesn't make what he did any better, but anyway, interesting historical fact to remember about Wilson. We'll then analyze the evolution of legal frameworks that redefine citizenship and the monetary system. particularly the dual identity concept distinguishing natural persons from legal entities. Okay, kind of a problem there. Using the term natural person. A natural person, if you go look it up, is one who has the capacity for rights and duties. The capacity doesn't mean they have them. We, the people, have rights and duties. We, the people, are sovereign. Natural persons is just saying, oh, I'm a natural infant. Because the definition of person is an infant. Under 1 USC subsection 8, look it up. Person. Now, I don't have it pulled up, but if anybody wants to throw it in the chat, that'd be great. From legal entities. Now, the legal entity part is another problem. People get stuck on this idea that somehow the birth certificate creates a corporation. It doesn't. A corporation has a charter. A corporation, usually, but not always, has stock. So, a legal entity can be a lot of other things other than a corporation, like an estate, like a trust, right? All of those things are legal entities. Thank you, Loha. All right, I'll read this just so everybody knows, because this is a very important point to make right here since we first came across this word, the natural person thing. So, okay, this is the definition of person, 1 USC, subsection 8. Person, human being, child, and individual, as including born alive infant. In determining the meaning of any act of Congress, that's everything, or of any ruling, regulation, or interpretation of the various administrative bureaus and agencies of the United States, which is all of the rest of the administrative state, the words person, human being, child, and individual shall include every infant member of the species Homo sapien who is born alive at any stage of development. Now, if anybody doesn't know this, when you use the word shall include in statutory construction or code construction, the word include means this and nothing else. The word shall include does not, the way we would think about that term in normal English, street English, or even Oxford English for that matter, to say that includes would mean and also, right? So trees include oaks and elms. That'd be fine. We wouldn't think of that being an odd statement. But if you said trees shall include oaks and elms in a statutory construction, it means that a pine tree is then for not a tree. Pine trees are no longer trees if you state it like that. So when this says, in determining all of this stuff, any ruling, any act of Congress, regulation, interpretation, all this, the words person, human being, and child, shall include every infant member of the species Homo sapien. Infant. Every single fucking code that says the word person only deals with the administration of abandoned infants. If there's one thing that everybody has to get through their head, that's it. That's the proof. It's right here. He did not bring it up, nor did I think he brings it up at any other point in this article. Instead, he says in the beginning here, this idea between natural persons from legal entities. Okay, so right off the bat, kind of a misnomer, but I wanted to fix that right here without going any farther, because some people will argue and say, well, you want to be the natural person. No, you don't. You want to be one of the people of the several states of the American Union. Now, is a natural person better than a legal fiction? Yes, certainly. However, being a natural person does not, under any circumstances, get you out of the vast majority of the shit that the attorney has put you under. To continue. Finally, we'll examine modern sovereignty through the Ukraine case study before offering reflections on reclaiming authentic governance. Well, that's all that we do at the VSOF, but I'll get into that later. Throughout, we'll prioritize primary sources and pattern recognition over isolated coincidences, inviting readers to examine the evidence and draw their own conclusions. Right. By the end of this, I'm not going to allow anybody to have any other conclusion because I've locked it down decades ago, and I'll prove it. But I'm glad that he goes at this as far as a introductory article for the newbies and says, hey, in a sense, come to your own conclusions. And also, I, in a sense, also think that he's saying kind of like, do your own homework, which is also what I tell people as well. But I always make sure that I give everybody the facts as to what I teach them. So, next section. Behind the national illusion. When I investigated further, I discovered that in 1871, an event did indeed occur in Washington, D.C. that deserves closer examination. The Act to provide a government for the District of Columbia was passed in the aftermath of the Civil War, at a time when the United States was deeply in debt to international banking interests. Bingo. While conveniently understood as a simple municipal reorganization, the legislation contained particular language and structures that raise profound questions about its broader implications. The Act established a, quote, municipal corporation, close quote, for District of Columbia, with specific language that differs markedly from previous founding documents at a time of significant changes in international finance. Right, because we all know who made this creature. It was the international bankers. It was the Luciferian Khazarian mob, the dark occultists, also known as the Atonists, for anybody who really wants to go back into history. All right, to continue. E.C. Kunis' meticulously researched work, The Empire of the City. Oh, by the way, The Empire of the City, I have that document. I specifically saved it into the VSOF online library, and I put it into the folder that is labeled Enemies of Freedom. It's one of the top folders in the library when you first get in there. And I made sure that I put it in there today because I realized, I thought, wait a second, I'm not sure I have that one in there. So I made sure that I put it in there. It's a free copy. You guys can download it. And I highly suggest that everybody read it because it is a very good book that basically connects the dots between the connection of how all of this works between the various different city states and how they're trying to basically, in a sense, perpetuate the New World Order, if you will. You guys probably can't read this, but I'm just going to read a little bit of the contents here, or table of contents. The fundamental basis of internationalism, geopolitics and the background of modern wars, the Eastern question, the concert of Europe, the European concert ends in the East, the new order of freedom, the new order ends in the East, the liberals against the conservatives and war, money power and power politics, the secret sixth great power, a study in power, the problems of the peace, the five, I think that's ideologies, of space and power, and then conclusion. So that's the table of contents for this particular book called The Empire of the City. And in a not unrelated connection regarding this particular history, I have uploaded onto Odysee, and I did this a little while back. There's this documentary called The Ring of Power that goes very, very deep into a lot of the things that are also stated in the book. Now, this little documentary, Ring of Power, is not a direct connection to the book, but it does cover a lot of the same information. So if you guys would want to take a look at that, it's an older documentary. I came across it years ago, and it was, to me, very enlightening as to making certain connections that I've never made before between law and banking and families and bloodlines and occultism and just kind of all of it. It was a very good starting point. So I highly suggest that everybody watch it when they have the time. It's definitely worth the time to watch. Okay, back to the Zerohedge article. All right, our understanding of institutions is often shaped by unseen influences. As Edward Bernays observed, quote, we are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. Close quote. This compels us to wonder, might our fundamental understanding of national structure itself be yet another manufactured reality designed for public consumption? The answer is yes. When we examine how various aspects of our reality operate by degree rather than by natural law or genuine consent, we might ask whether our conception of national sovereignty itself might be another form of fiat reality. The patterns of governance transformation identified above did not emerge in isolation. This systematic transformation follows what American historian Anthony Sutton, and by the way, I'm going to be uploading a few interviews with Anthony Sutton that I've recently found on some hard drives that people were kind enough to exchange with me. And because Anthony Sutton very rarely did interviews. So I'm glad that I found these couple of interviews, and I'm going to post them probably just onto Odysee. I might be able to get away with posting them onto Rumble as well. And Anthony Sutton wrote a lot of books about the connections between Wall Street and governance and a lot of the modern history regarding war and industrialism and banking and the rise of Bolshevism and the rise of socialism, all kinds of socialism, whether it be communist socialism, whether it be kind of what you would call like the socialist nanny state, which is kind of akin to what America's become and kind of what England is, compared to then the other form of socialism, which is National Socialism, which is what Germany and Hitler had. So Anthony Sutton, very well documented author, and I will add those definitely onto the VSOF platforms because they're extremely important. And I also have a added folder again in the VSOF online members library, and I'll try and find as many of Anthony Sutton's books that are no longer copywritten and that we can get in digital, and I'll make sure to put them in there as well. Okay, so this systematic transformation follows what historian Anthony Sutton documented as a pattern of financial political collusion, transcending apparent ideological divisions. In his work, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, Sutton revealed that Chase Bank, controlled by the Rockefellers, continued to collaborate with Nazi Germany even after Pearl Harbor, handling Nazi accounts through their Paris branch until 1942. This demonstrates how financial power operates independently of national policy or supposed wartime loyalties. Right, because the internationalists don't care. The Luciferian dark occultists are globalists. They couldn't care less about national boundaries or the people within them, for that matter. This evolutionary process followed a historical trajectory that began centuries earlier, but accelerated significantly after 1871. Understanding this timeline reveals how governance structures evolved incrementally through a series of seemingly unrelated developments that, viewed collectively, suggest a coordinated pattern. Exactly. Now, the entire timeline class and the entire timeline document of the VSOF explains all of this from start to finish. Okay, because the timeline classes go all the way back far into the BCs as far as where they start. And the timeline itself is a document that is 84 pages and will this month be expanded out to probably 100 pages because I'm going to add every single thing to this timeline that I have amassed over the past 5 years, because it was 5 years ago when I did the first timeline class. So I've been amassing documents, I've been amassing other timelines, and all of that's going to be added. And then I will do another timeline class, which will probably take 2 days to get through, because I barely got through this one when I did it, and I did not cover every single passage within the timeline doc. However, that having been said, you can read the timeline, you can search it, obviously, it's just in a Word doc, and I highly suggest that everybody watch the timeline class because it will give you a connection to the rest of what we're going to cover, where it probably doesn't flesh out as much of the history as really should be. Because a lot of this stuff is pattern, when he talks about pattern recognition, this has been done over and over in various civilizations. Just really doesn't have anything necessarily to do exactly with America. This has been the modus operandi for a very long time across the entire planet. So, 3 centers of power, a documented pattern. Kuntz research identifies 3 centers that appear to function with unusual sovereignty and influence. Each merits more rigorous analysis. The City of London, not to be confused with London proper. The city is a 677-acre zone with its own governance structure, police force, and legal status. And just skimming this quickly, I noticed that he didn't even put in the date. Okay, so the City of London Let's refer to the timeline doc. The city of London was established by the Romans. When William the Conqueror invaded England in 1066 and brought the filthy Knazzagashing with him, it is said that he recognized the city of London as having all its liberties and was said to have, quote, come as a friend to London, close quote. This is because the filth that set up the city of London, the Romans and the priests of El, had kept control over it for over 1,000 years. Don't believe me? Go check the Wikipedia page. So, and then the attorney, which is the one that obviously set that up, the aspects of what an attorn is, or to attorn, is to turn over to another. Or from Old French, a turner, to turn to, assign. Attribute, dispose. Turnor, to turn, from Latin turnare, to turn on a lathe, right? So, as much as when they turn you over to the black robed priests of El sitting on the bench, that is the ways of Rome, basically. And that's why the city of London has been that way ever since 43 AD. It's also the reason why the king or queen, whoever happens to be sitting on the bench of England, or I should say the throne of England, even though it's an illegitimate bloodline at the moment, but I won't get into that. They have to ask permission to enter the quote unquote city. Why? Because they don't own it. Okay? So, a little bit of back history on the city of London. All right, to continue. The city is a zone with its own governance structure, so on and so forth. Financial records indicate it handles approximately $6 trillion in daily transactions. Sound crazy? Because it is. Because the city of London is the financial capital of the world, meaning of these three cities. The Vatican City is the control of the souls of the world, meaning the world religion. Religions, I should say. Because Vatican City controls not just Catholicism, but all the rest of them as well, even though that's not exactly well known. And then Washington, D.C. is the military control of the planet. So, they control the money, they control your soul, and they control the military. And people say, well, these are all different countries. Again, not relevant. The globalists, the Luciferian dark occultists, are globalists. And they've been around for a long, long time. A lot longer than any of the countries or even city-states that we're going to be talking about throughout this entire article. They predate all of it because they created it. But we'll get into all the specificity of that later. Okay, so the corporation maintains unique historical privileges, including its own police force and electrical system, where voting rights are granted primarily to businesses rather than residents. Okay, why? Why the hell is that a thing? Why are they granted to businesses rather than residents? Because it was set up under the Romans and the law merchant. It's the law merchant that controls the city of London. Not common law, not any law of England, and not even exactly Roman civil law. It's probably the most strictly run corporate city on and through the law merchant in the entire world. Okay, so an unusual arrangement that prioritizes financial interests over traditional democratic representation, obviously. While it enjoys significant independence in its internal affairs and financial operations, it ultimately remains subject to UK parliamentary sovereignty. Sure it does. Tell me one time when they've ever actually exercised any power over the city of London. Not that I can recall. All right, next one, Vatican City. Officially recognized as the world's smallest sovereign state, it maintains diplomatic relations with 183 countries and operates under its own legal system. Right, that would be ecclesiastical law, people, dealing with canon and dealing with papal bulls. Its historical influence on global affairs is extensively documented through primary sources. Exactly, like things like Unum Sanctum, which was the first testimoniary trust in the entire world, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was, let's go back up here. By the way, my timeline is all color-coded within the document. So everything that's green is either church law or specifically Vatican law. And here we go. Case in point, suspect. 1302. On 18th November 1302, Pope Boniface the 8 issued the infamous papal bull Unum Sanctum, the first express trust. He claimed control over the entire planet. Period. Full stop. Not a joke. In celebration for this monumental lie, he commissioned a gold-plated headdress in the shape of a pine cone, with an elaborate crown at its base. Aside from all that was written, the bull ends with the following statement. Quote, furthermore, we declare, we proclaim, we define that it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff. Close quote. Since the bull declared that Roman pontiff was supreme control over the material world, he states that the body, our body, your body, is governed by the soul, and the soul is governed by the ruler of the spiritual. Therefore, the Roman pontiff is governor of both soul and body. This is some of the most dark, Luciferian, occult shit on the planet. And everybody thinks that, the Catholics are, there's no problem with the Catholics. Guess what? This is the cult of Rome, okay? And by the way, for anybody who's Catholic out there, I'm not attacking the Catholic people. I'm attacking the structure of the cult of Rome because they do shit like this. And they've done it for a long time and they still do it. But to continue, because this bull is extremely important. The bull laid down dogmatic propositions on the unity of the Catholic Church, the necessity of belonging to it for eternal salvation, the position of the Pope as the supreme head of the Church, and the duty thence arising from submission to the Pope in order to belong to the Church, and thus to attain salvation. The Pope further emphasized the higher position of the spiritual in comparison with the secular order. This is an aspect of the division and the separation of the spiritual and temporal, which is something else that William the Conqueror did in 1066, but I'll leave that for probably a little bit later. The bull was promulgated during an ongoing dispute between Boniface VIII and Philip the Fair, King of France, who actually had some sense. As long as England and France were at war with each other, neither was likely to participate in any expedition to the Holy Land. Benedict sent Cardinal Nuntius, I don't know if that's a name or I think it's a title. Yeah, I think it's a title. To each court to broker a truce. Philip levied taxes on the French clergy of 1/2 their annual income. That's kind of funny. On 5 February 1296, Boniface responded with the papal bull Clericatus Lactos, forbidding clerics without authority from the Holy See to pay to laymen any part of their income or the revenue of the church. And likewise, all emperors, kings, dukes, counts, etc., to receive such payments under pain of excommunication. See, back then, the church, I should say the cult of Rome, was its own power structure, was an international power structure that had its roots, had its tentacles, let's put it that way, into every single country in Europe, and some even outside of Europe. What were they doing? They had their own armies. The bishops and the cardinals had their own knights, and they were running basically an international cabal. Not too much different than what they're still doing. Except now they've connected all of the rest of the other parts into it, meaning the military and the rest of the spiritual and the financial. But we'll get into the rest of that later. Okay, so forbidding cleric. Okay, All right, now, Edward I of England, one of my favorite guys, responded with outlawry. This effectively withdrew the protection of the English common law from the clergy and confiscated the temporal properties of bishops who refused his levies. Brilliant. Very good way to take care of the bastards. As Edward was demanding an amount well above the 10th offered by clergy, Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Winchesterly, left it to every individual clergyman to pay as he saw fit. Right. And I just have a note here, more information as to what he did during this time, other papal bulls at L. But I thought that was highly important for us to at least give a quick look-see at, considering it's the first time we're going to run into the Vatican City and what they're up to. All right, next one. Washington, D.C. created explicitly as a district outside the jurisdiction of any state. DC's governance structure was fundamentally altered by the 1871 Act. The congressional record contains the full text of this reorganization, which uses language consistent with corporate formation rather than constitutional governance. That document can also be found in the Vocational Science of Freedom online members library. What's particularly intriguing about these three centers is their documented interrelationships. Financial records reveal significant transactions between banking interests in all three, such as the 1832 Rothschild family loan of £400,000 to the Holy See and the 1875 purchase of Suez Canal shares by the British government with Rothschild Banking. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily connect the three, but okay, maybe he'll make his point in a minute. Diplomatic archives demonstrate coordinated policy positions that preceded public announcements, exemplified by President Roosevelt's 1939 appointment of Myron C. Taylor as the United States representative to the Vatican, to align policies during the tumultuous pre-war period. Well, we all knew what happened after the Second World War, the thing called Operation Paperclip, of which the Vatican was the center figure of. Recently uncovered Vatican documents reveal another dimension of these diplomatic channels: secret communications between Pope Pius and Adolf Hitler in 1939, facilitated by Prince Philip von Hessen as a liaison. These back-channel negotiations occurred even as the United States and Britain were developing their own political positions towards Nazi Germany. Well, Britain was completely controlled by, as far as policy was concerned, by a drunken lackey who was also a womanizer and was unequivocally told by his masters to attack and destroy Germany. And we all know who that is. And it had nothing to do with Hitler. In fact, Churchill even said, I believe he was quoted as saying, it wouldn't matter if Germany was being run by a Jesuit priest. This war is about destroying the German people, basically their economic, banking, and industrial abilities that were far outpacing, very quickly so, the English. But anyway, I don't get into the history of World War II, but I just wanted to just state that just as a second, because they started to talk about the negotiations, the United States and Britain, and I just had to bring up that asshole. Okay, so to continue. Historical records further show how these centers acted in concert with major global transformations, including the coordinated approach of post-World War II reconstruction efforts, where Vatican support aligned with Washington's strategic initiatives. Yeah. And also getting the rest of the high-level Nazis out and us taking some of them, some of them that were more capable of building rockets, like Werner von Braun and the rest of his buddies. But anyway, these document connections suggest patterns of collaboration that transcend mere coincidence. The visual symbolism of these power centers is equally revealing. Each maintains its own flag representing autonomous authority. The city of London, with its crimson sword and dragon shield bearing the motto Domini Digis Nos, Lord direct us. Oh, Lord direct us. Yeah. Anybody want to venture a guess as to what Lord they're talking about? Vatican City, with its gold and silver keys beneath the papal tiara. Oh, that's this one, right? Yeah, okay. Yep. And Washington, D.C., with its 3 red stars on horizontal bars. Now, this one is the same and comes from the Washington, meaning actual Washington, the first president, his family crest. This is on his family crest itself. So just as a historical point of fact of that. Okay. The documented relationships between these 3 centers represent nodes in a broader network of financial power that transcends national boundaries and stated policies. The coordination within this network is evidenced by Anthony Sutton's research in Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. That one is a must read. I'm just going to leave it at that. Which documented that William Boyce Thompson, director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, personally donated $1 million to the Bolsheviks in 1917 and arranged American Red Cross mission support. This while the United States officially opposed the Communist Revolution. Such contradictions illustrate how financial interests operate above national policy, with the 3 centers serving as primary hubs in a global system where banking power routinely supersedes governmental authority. Now, I don't know if he's going to get into the particular book that I'm going to bring up. But aside from Anthony Sutton's work, everybody needs to read. And yes, it's probably going to take you a year to go through it. And I apologize in advance. However, everybody should read Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. Okay? Because Carroll Quigley was a man that had access to all of the archives of the Council on Foreign Relations. So Council on Foreign Relations, I know he had access to those records, like all of them. And he wrote this enormous book called Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. And it names everything. It names people. It names the organizations. It tells you where the connections are made. It tells you everything about what the hell is going on regarding all the connections of the New World Order. And it's not redundant per se with Anthony Sutton's work. I'd say it's pretty much the two of them put together they fit hand in hand, really. What one doesn't cover, the other does, or they cover in a different way. And the connections made within Tragedy and Hope, and then also his other work, the Anglo-American Establishment. Holy shit. When you talk about the connections between England and America, and about how the English intelligentsia and how particularly the English intelligence apparatus has kind of always had a hand in, or basically been the very creator of, the American intelligence apparatus, and still in a sense basically controls it. Another amazing book. So anyway, I just want to bring that up so you guys also have that in the back of your purview, as to either just read them in their entirety or to go and use them as kind of like encyclopedias. And again, I think I have pretty much every single book of Quigley's in the VSOF online members library. All right, to continue. The City of London maintains unique historical privileges and administrative autonomy while remaining ultimately subject to UK sovereignty. Like I said, it's not like they ever use it. Vatican City functions as a recognized sovereign state with diplomatic relations, while Washington, D.C. operates under federal jurisdiction but with governance structures distinct from U.S. states. Each has specialized in a different domain of power. Exactly, like I said, financial, ideological, and military, respectively. And yeah, religious is also. So spiritual, financial, and military. Even their physical features share curious similarities. As noted in historical architecture studies, each prominently displays an ancient Egyptian obelisk. Well, okay, the one in DC is not an actual ancient Egyptian obelisk. The other two, however, are. The other two were taken from Egypt. The one in DC was built over a long period of time. So, while mainstream historians attribute this to neoclassical fashion, we might reasonably ask whether these identical symbols in three centers of power might carry deeper significance, especially given the documented connections between these entities in financial and diplomatic archives. As architectural historians like James Stevens Curl have documented in his works as the Egyptian Revival, Egyptian motifs, including obelisks, became prominent features in Western civil and financial architecture during 18th and 19th centuries, coinciding with the expansion of banking institutions and centralized governments. Imagine that. Okay. I'll pause on this for a minute because this is extremely important. Why is there all this Egyptian shit everywhere? It's because of who these people are. Okay. The best guy to learn about the real history of the Atenists is probably Michael Tsarian. I uploaded some works of Michael Tsarian specifically for this reason, because I realized that I didn't have any of this information up, and it's kind of an entire study of its own, and I really don't want to get into it, and I just don't have the time because obviously I focus on law and civics and everything else. However, if you want to watch Michael Tsarian's Origins and Oracle series, it goes through all of this stuff in the ancient history. We're talking ancient Egypt. We're talking even matters that deal with pre-Diluvian flood, meaning pre-impact of the Younger Dryas impact around, should be around 11,600 some BC, 11,900 BC, something like that. And the civilizations that existed prior to the Great Impact, some of which we know about. But anyway, Michael Tsarian is very, very good at teaching about who and what are the Atonists, the ones that followed the cult of Aton. That's where all of this comes from. That's where all these people come from. That's where the perpetuation of the followers of Akhenaten. And Akhenaten, and again, I have to do this. I have to get into this a little bit. So Akhenaten was an Egyptian pharaoh. Akhenaten, pretty much without question, once you really start looking at it and see the facts, Akhenaten was the historical Moses. And it was said that he came from some other place other than Egypt. And he became pharaoh. Okay. And if you look at the busts of Akhenaten, he's got a really big lung feature on his face. Surprise, surprise. And Akhenaten decided during his tenure of being a pharaoh of Egypt, he decided to just get rid of all of the historical gods of Egypt, of which there, I believe, were 43 of them, all corresponding with one of the human chromosomes, but I won't get into that. And he said, there's only one God. It's the sun god. And by the way, it's me. Worship me. Sound familiar? So the Egyptians basically said, okay, you're fucking crazy, and you can take all of your followers and get out of here. Which is the historical story that we get from Moses. That, oh, they were driven out of Egypt. Oh, woe them. Well, yeah. If you really go back in history and start to learn the truth of what happened, you'll come to a different conclusion. And then you'll realize that also these people, yes, did wander around in the wilderness because nobody wanted them. And then they kind of set up shop later in Babylon. And then they started doing weird things like creating script out of nothing and telling people that the stamps that they created were worth currency. And then the Babylonians said, what? And they also tried to only keep to themselves. And then they created laws that were for their people. And then they tried to impose those laws onto the Babylonians. And the Babylonians were like, excuse me? You can get the fuck out of here. And again, they got kicked out again. So you sensing a pattern here? So anyway, Atonists. Just remember that. They are the Atonists. If you go back far enough in history, again, it's going to take you a while, but I highly suggest going through Michael Tsarian's work. It will connect some dots for you. A lot of them. All right, to continue with this Egyptian motif. All right, it's worth noting that despite their prominence in these centers of power, most educational curricula rarely mention these architectural connections or their potential significance. Right, because who writes the curriculum? Anyway, raising questions about what other important historical patterns remain outside standard educational frameworks. These three power centers did not emerge independently. Their development follows a historical pattern of legal and financial changes, beginning with the 1871 Act's corporate restructuring of Washington, D.C. The City of London had already established its unique financial autonomy centuries earlier, as I already read for you guys, while the Vatican City would formalize its sovereignty in the 1929 Lantern Treaty. Not to say the Vatican City has not been its own power structure, and the power within Rome has clearly been there since the founding of Rome. And if nobody knows who founded Rome, it was a bunch of nasty bastards that were Yahudi exiles who came around the corner and landed in this little place on Italy. And then they stole the language of the people to the north of them. They stole the history to the people of the east of them. And they stole the pottery of the people to the south of them, and then pretended that they created all of it, all while keeping their dark cult fuckery afoot. That's who founded Rome. So, to continue. their evolution accelerated there, meaning the three cities, accelerated through the 20th century as banking models and governance structures increasingly aligned. Surprise, surprise. Particularly during the key financial reforms of the 1913-1944 period, documented by financial historians. Understanding this timeline reveals how governance structures transformed incrementally through seemingly unrelated developments that, viewed collectively, point to a coherence rarely acknowledged in mainstream accounts. Why? Because the Atenists believe that they have the right to rule the world. Because Pharaoh Akhenaten got booted out of Egypt, and back then in the day, the Egyptians felt that the Pharaoh was the ruler of the earth and that had the right to be so. So you get this strange guy who kind of comes out of nowhere and takes up this throne, and then obviously does some nefarious shit, and the people kick him out. And then all these thousands and thousands of years later, guess what? They're still trying to take over the world. So with that, I think I'll pause here because we've gotten to our hour. Now, I'd like to remind everyone, the mega file for this class is in the show notes for this class, which will be on Rumble and Odysee and YouTube. So the mega files for this class are here, and I'll just click on them just to show you guys what's in here. It's just 2 files at the moment, I believe. Yeah. So I have the suggested class playlist for new members. This is for everyone who is new to the VSOF or who might have been here for a little while, but would like to kind of watch things in a logical order than just trying to work your way through every bit of class that's on the Vocational Science Freedom websites. And then the timeline doc. And then, as I said before, this timeline doc will be updated, and then I'll have a class. I'm trying to shoot for the end of March, the last weekend in March, which would be the 29th and the 30th. But if I don't get around to adding the last 5 years of the rest of this information, I might have to push it back to maybe the beginning of April or even maybe mid-April. But I'll keep everybody apprised of that timeline. And as always, VSOF lifetime members can come to class for free. And everyone else, the all-day classes are 3 rounds of silver per day or a $100 donation to the Vocational Science Freedom PayPal. All right. Now, let me take a look through chat. Breaking Spectre said, just accept our word because we say so. Yeah, exactly. Most have no idea even where to look or even how to research it. Again, true. And again, thanks, Loha, for putting up the one US code so we can all learn exactly what a person is. And Spectre said, hence the segue into Ukraine later in the article. Okay, so there must be... Okay, so we'll probably get to that next time. And then, is there any comments, questions, or things to bring up that anybody else wants to mention before we sign off for the evening?
So I was thinking about some of the author's early introduction to this article, and I would argue that some of the stuff that he's mentioning as far as, hey, people have a trouble understanding this stuff, is that if you're familiar with the concept of Dunbar's number, it basically says that normal 100 IQ people can basically keep tabs on about 150 relations, essentially of any degree, from their best friends to, oh yeah, aren't you the kid that sacks groceries at the grocery store that I have no idea, oh, you're the son of the dude that's the cousin of the, somebody.
You said 100 IQ equals 130 connections. Is that what you said?
150.
150. Okay. And you call
Yes.
that Dunbar's number?
Yes, Dunbar.
Okay, thank you. I've never heard of this before.
Yeah. So that does increase with IQ. It's worth sort of looking into just a little bit, like just the Wikipedia article. So because one of the other groups of people that I've been looking into were actually trying to theoretical off the deep end sort of stuff, basically trying to increase the average IQ through the use of genetic modification and the ectogenesis, the artificial birthing bags, basically Dolly the lamb, but using it for people, which is something that news come out.
Yeah,
But
the eugenicists.
yeah,
The eugenicists have been wanting to do this for obviously a long period of time, and of course they've been doing it with their own stock, basically by keeping track of the higher level stock, if you will, meaning those that would be more likely to have a higher IQ automatically.
yes.
And then they've been, put it very simply, the atonists have been manipulating and controlling certain bloodlines, and they've been using those bloodlines to their advantage because they themselves are actually not that intelligent.
Yeah, which is why you will actually have, so like a lot of people don't really know it, but like so Bill Gates was, his wife is actually a third generation, twice removed Rothschild.
Not surprising.
Sounds about right.
And so it, like the old meme of hey, my sister said she wanted to get treated like a princess, so I married her off to someone from France for peace. That's essentially sort of what happens in that. And this also sort of aligns with, if you've done any research into like not the MK Ultra, but the Project Monarch and the
Yes.
the stuff that came before that.
Yep.
It's like some of the reject lines will basically get fed through that crapshoot. And then if they, whereas some of the more, if we were talking about like a royal primogeniture line, might it's have some remote possibility of actually inheriting some throne somewhere, are the ones that a lot of times will get reserved essentially to be married off to people like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Musk, or not Musk, but the Facebook alien guy.
Zuckerberg.
Yeah, Zuck the Cut.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they want it, because what they do in the bloodline, and this, I don't know if they get it. I don't know if he gets into this later in the article or not, but since we're on the subject, the whole entire bloodline connections, a lot of them can be followed through and understood through a website called Burke's Peerage, which you can track a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it. And then the more ancient bloodlines, like what I was talking about, going all the way back to the Atonists, what they've been doing is they've been keeping track of these bloodlines throughout thousands of years. And also, yes, those that are not necessarily within the bloodline, but all of a sudden, say, amass a great amount of wealth or a great amount of power or whatnot, then they try to come in and marry into that wealth so that they can pull it back into themselves.
Yes.
Because the Celts and the Druid bloodline go back. Here's the thing about that. You can actually make the connection all the way back into the ancient world, because the Celtic and Druidic bloodlines go back just as far, if not farther back, than the Egyptian pharaohs, because I believe Akhenaten himself actually took I think it was a Druidic princess as his wife, and even Tutankhamun has northern white DNA, and they couldn't, when they figured this out and they ran the scans and whatnot, when they ran his DNA, it became like a big secret, because they're like, oh shit, we can't let this get out. Well, that was the understanding of what had happened, is that these cultures were much more connected in the ancient world. The high level cultures were much more connected in the ancient world, and they did, kind of like, in a weird sense, kind of like exchange bloodlines with each other. Not so different than kind of what they're doing today, but now they're doing it for a nefarious reason, to maintain and control power. Back then it was, I guess, in a sense, sort of the same thing, but they were trying to better the world from it.
Well, it helps to maintain trade relations and stuff like that, but they use it to essentially subvert, because basically every civilization essentially traces its lineage paternally, whereas the Luciferians trace it maternally, which allows them to basically say, hey, okay, well, we're not going to, we'll give you a wife, but what the wives are essentially trained to do is to subvert the power, will, and authority of the father by essentially raising the children to be essentially dark,
Luciferians. Yeah. If you want I think the best example for that everybody would probably know, is the example of Gloria Vanderbilt and her fucking son, who is, obviously Anderson Cooper. Yeah. Who is clearly a dark occultist and is clearly a pedophile, and the shit that she did to him and man, the stuff that you see pictures of around that in the old, like when he was a kid, and the stuff that was around her house, Gloria Vanderbilt's house, like this demon shit. Oh my God, it's crazy. But so that's a very, very good example of exactly what you just said.
Yeah, somebody during the COVID crisis, he had a picture of his wall that was basically Jesus boiling in shit with
he also had a
Mary.
small, and he also had a small cutout of a small child in a dress, literally in his living room.
Well, I would argue that the willful occulting of so much of this knowledge is actually, I mean, it's kind of why secret societies are formed. I would argue is specifically because they are keeping track of it somewhere, but you also have to, if you're going to keep track of it while also keeping it secret from somebody else, you're going to sort of need to keep up with that. And I would argue that the Habsburgs were
definitely, they were, yeah. I know that there's an author who did some very specific work about the bloodline connections. I think Jim Mars did some work on the bloodlines. Michael Tsarian has also done some work on the bloodlines. Bill Cooper did some work on the bloodlines, even though he's no longer with us. And there's probably someone who is like the top person, or the one that, say, wrote the most about it, but I wouldn't exactly know off the top of my head who that author would be, because as I said before, following the bloodlines is not something that I even so much as worry about too much. I just lump them in, know who they are, in a sense, know where they come from, but I'm more worried and care more about the specificity of what their
plan,
yeah, what their weapons are, what their plan has been, how far they go back, why they're believing what they believe, and to make sure that I have correct historical facts to connect that to. So it all makes sense, which of course it does if you understand the Athenist. So, but anyway, okay.
One more point to the article real quick here before you end.
Sure.
I know you said you didn't read all the way through it, but
nope,
not here tonight, but I mean after you cut the show off here, scroll to the end and take a look at his timeline that he's constructed if you haven't already. I'd be curious to see how much of that aligns with some of the stuff you've already pulled for your timeline that you teach on. If there's anything that you may have missed or anything that looks awry, I'm just kind of curious.
Okay, yeah, I'll take a quick look at it after class. So, okay, but yeah, anyway, since we're half an hour past overtime, I'll come back and we'll start here again next Saturday. So with that, thanks everybody for showing up. Thanks everybody for your comments, and thanks everybody for signing in. And all of you out there that are listening on other platforms, also thank you for joining. And as always, make sure that you go ahead and throw a comment or question into the show. I'll make sure that I answer them. And again, if you'd like to join the Vocational Science Freedom on our Revolt server, you can go to vocationalsciencefreedom.wordpress.com and go to the welcome package, and simply then download the welcome package, and it'll tell you how to get here, both for Mega and for our Revolt server. So with that, hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your weekend, as always. And until next time, stay safe and stay sovereign.